Opposition leader Raila Odinga and his running mate Kalonzo Musyoka have opted to withdraw from the October 26th election, saying their concerns have not been addressed by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Solomon Serwanja from our sister station in Uganda, NBS, spoke to Uganda's opposition leader Kiza Besigye on his thoughts on the current political climate in Kenya. Listen in.
We're following the developments in Kenya of Raila Odinga abandoning the electoral process. NASA will not participate in the fresh elections, so to speak, organized by the IEBC. And now we want to pick some thoughts from key opposition leader here in Uganda, Dr. Kiza Besigye, about what he thinks on NASA's decision to get out of the race. All right, thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Kiza Besigye. Let's start with your general thought on NASA's decision. What do you make of it?
Well, frankly, when I first heard it, I was confused as to what they were trying to achieve. But having read their statement, I think their intention is clear. It's a tactical maneuver on their part to have more time ahead of the next election following the annulment, because the Constitution, I think, imposes a period of 60 days within which another election should be organized. And they have been complaining that the grievances they took to court that led to the annulment won't be rectified ahead of the next election. And I think the main grievances they have been talking about is the Electoral Commission itself, reforming the Electoral Commission, which was found wanting by the Supreme Court, and also reforming the processes of organizing the election, the procurement processes for the ICT, for the electoral materials, and so on and so forth. I think the main challenge to reforming those things, it was said, was time, that within the 60 days it would not be possible. I think it is important that ahead of any election, there is maximum consensus by parties to the election, or people who are taking part in an election. There should be an effort to have maximum consensus on the process. And secondly, there should be maximum transparency in how the process is conducted till the end. If those things are not there, then they cause trouble that starts to brew in these countries. And the instability we have had in Africa, frankly, is traceable to how political processes have been managed, whether they have been managed fairly and transparently.
Well, you rise on the same grounds in the several elections. You don't trust, you used not to trust, I don't know if you do now, the Electoral Commission and electoral processes in Uganda, and perhaps that's the same issue that Raila Odinga is premising his withdrawal from the elections.
Well, first of all, I must make a caveat when commenting on Kenyan issues. I have had challenges by Kenyans saying, you know, how do you start interfering with our own processes? I would like to make it very clear that I am not fully seized of all the nitty-gritties of their political system. So my comments are comments really on the broader issues of principle. Secondly, I have no preferences in terms of which party in Kenya governs Kenya, really. I think my interest would be best served if the party that the people of Kenya support most takes leadership. So my only interest is how to establish which party is supported most. That there must be fairness, there must be justice, that there must be transparency in the process. And if you go by what the Supreme Court said, the Supreme Court certainly had issues with how IBEC had conducted the election. And therefore, zooming into IBEC to see whether it's in a form that will act differently, I think is fair enough. Now, the tactical maneuver they have taken, that NASA has taken, and how it will play out, really, I don't know. But I think the best thing, as far as I'm concerned, would be for all parties to step back and have a dialogue so that there is maximum consensus on how they go forward. Once they are agreed on how they manage the process, eventually the party that has the greatest support will provide leadership to Kenya. If the greatest support is with the Jubilee, as had been declared, it will still come out as the winner of the election. So I think Kenyans, as all of us, indeed East Africans, and we have a legitimate interest in what happens in Kenya, because what happens in Kenya affects us. I think the overwhelming focus must be on the fairness. Let's have dialogue. I think there is need to have dialogue, to have consensus on the process, rather than having confrontation that cannot lead to resolution of the process.
If you had an opportunity to speak to Raila Odinga, I mean, you're synonymous with defiance. You know, you've on several occasions called for demonstrations from Ugandans who don't believe in the way the NRM regime is operating Uganda. Similar to Kenya, Raila Odinga has called for massive protests. We've seen different protests in different parts of the country. What would you tell him, especially at such a time?
Well, again, frankly, I don't think I'm the best placed person to advise Kenyans, whether it's Raila, whether it's the leaders of Jubilee, on how to project their interests best. As I have said, I'm not seized with all the nitty-gritties of what goes on in the Kenyan polity, and so I think it would be imprudent to start prescribing what needs to be done. Having said that, what I know as of general principle is that if someone feels aggrieved and their grievances are not being attended to in a manner that they feel is reasonable, I think they are well justified to struggle to be heard in these political processes. Because, again, what eventually establishes a democratic dispensation, what establishes a democratic culture, is having respect for all political views, even minorities, especially on important fundamental questions like elections. There is need to have maximum consensus, and therefore you will not be heard unless you assert your will to be heard. If you are meek and you say, what can I do? Nobody will hear what you are saying. So that is the way I look at things.
All right, Doctor, of course we know that the international community is keeping an eye on Kenya right now and the developments there. The EU has made a statement. The American ambassador there also yesterday called for stability in Kenya. And yet a lot of different people, for example, from NASA, challenging the reactions from the international community. What are your thoughts on the way the international community is conducting itself on the developments in Kenya?
Well, I once again would not like to be judgmental in what is influencing them to do or say what they are saying. Coming from a remote position that I am doing. But I have my own experience here with the international community and how they interface with the political processes. And I think here they have been making very serious mistakes in taking matters of what they call stability as the most critical in the political processes. And stability, they tend to translate it to mean maintaining the status quo. And so they tend to think that if they rally behind the powerful, there will be stability. And I think that's a grave error. It has caused us a lot of problems here. In fact, when Mr. Museveni went to the bush in 1980, there was a big Commonwealth election observer team that was here in Uganda, and that said that the election had been free and fair.